Today we're going to look at Section 4 of Chapter 15 on Lincoln's election and Southern secession. Within our section today, we're going to take a look at why the Democratic Party split in the election of 1860. We'll look at some of the different issues in the election. We'll describe the secession of the Southern states from the Union, and we will explain the Union's response to secession. To start out with one American story, it has to deal with this big picture here on the left. In May of 1860, Murat Halstead was a reporter for the Cincinnati Commercial, and he traveled to Chicago to cover the Republican convention. Most people assumed that William Seward of New York would win the party's presidential nomination, but there were other candidates too. Throughout the convention, candidates tried to win away Seward's delegates. As the other candidates hoped, Seward failed to win the nomination on the first ballot. Throughout the tense voting, Abraham Lincoln, a lesser-known candidate from Illinois, gained strength, and Halstead described the scene as Lincoln received the winning votes. He says, "There was a moment's silence. The nerves of the thousands, which through the hours of suspense had been subjected to terrible tension, relaxed, and as deep breaths of relief were taken, there was a noise in the wigwam or the convention hall, like the rush of a great wind just before a storm. And in another breath, the storm was there. There were thousands cheering with the energy of insanity." And that's from his book, The Caucuses of 1860. So having won the nomination, Lincoln could turn his attention to winning the general election. And in this section today, we're going to take a look at the election of 1860 and its role in pushing the nation towards civil war. So here we go. So in April, a few weeks before the Republicans nominated Lincoln, the Democrats held their own convention in Charleston, South Carolina. Northern and Southern Democrats disagreed over what to say about slavery in the party's platform or statement of beliefs. The Southerners wanted the party to defend slavery in the platform at all costs. But Northerners wanted the platform to support popular sovereignty as a way of deciding whether a territory became a free state or a slave state. The Northerners won the platform vote, which caused 50 Southern delegates to walk out of the convention. Now, the remaining delegates tried to nominate a presidential candidate, Stephen A. Douglas from Illinois, who we've talked about before. He was a leading contender, but the Southerners who stayed refused to back him because of his support for popular sovereignty. Douglas could not win enough votes to gain the nomination. Finally, the Democrats gave up and decided to meet again in Baltimore in June to choose a candidate. But the Baltimore convention opened, Northerners and Southerners remained at odds. This time, almost all the Southerners left the meeting. So with the Southerners gone, the Northern Democrats nominated Douglas. Meanwhile, the Southern Democrats decided to nominate their own candidate, and they chose John Breckinridge of Kentucky, the current vice president, and he was also a big supporter of slavery. Now, as we talked about in One American Story, the Republicans had already nominated Lincoln. So in addition to Lincoln, Douglas and Breckinridge, a candidate from a fourth party, entered the race. This party was called the Constitutional Union Party, and its members had one aim, which was only to preserve the Union. And they nominated John Bell of Tennessee to run for president. So the election of 1860 turned into two different races for the presidency, one in the North, one in the South. Obviously, up here we have Lincoln. This is Stephen A. Douglas. They were kind of squaring off in the North. Breckinridge and Bell competed for the Southern vote. So this is Breckinridge right here. This is John Bell down here in the corner. So Lincoln and Breckinridge were considered to have the most extreme views on slavery because Lincoln opposed the expansion of slavery, not slavery as a whole, but just that it wouldn't expand into the territories. And Breckinridge insisted that the federal government be required to protect slavery in any territory. Douglas and Bell were considered to be more moderate because neither wanted the federal government to pass new laws on slavery. Now, the outcome of the election made it clear that the nation was tired of compromise. Lincoln defeated Douglas in the North, and Breckinridge carried most of the South. Douglas and Bell managed to win only in the states between the North and the Deep South. Because the North had more people in it than the South, Lincoln won the election. Despite Lincoln's statements that he would do nothing to abolish slavery in the South, white Southerners did not trust him at all. And before we move on any further, this is what the election map ended up looking like. You can see here Lincoln won the number of electoral votes in a huge fashion, mainly because he carried the largest cities in the North where there was a big group of Lincoln supporters in these cities. But as you can see here in New Jersey, they had a split vote where half the votes, 4 votes went to Lincoln and 3 votes went to Douglas. And then in here you can see that Bell did win some states in the middle here, but not enough to do any damage. And then Breckinridge, even though he had less popular votes than Douglas, he won most of the South here, but only resulted in 72 votes. The reason that Douglas had so many popular votes but so few electoral votes is because how the electoral votes work is each state is assigned a number based on their population. So as you can see in here, New York State has the most electoral votes with 35, then Pennsylvania with 27. So if you win that state, so if Lincoln even wins New York by 1 popular vote, he gets all 35 electoral votes. That's how the system works. So as you can see, Lincoln did very well, and he was actually, by demographics and population, he was set up to win because he had the most support in the North. And nowadays, we can take a look at demographics and polls and things like that, and we're able to tell pretty accurately how a candidate's going to do before the election even comes now with statistics and analyzing those stats. So like I said, a lot of people were sure that he and the other Republicans had moved to ban slavery, so as a result, white Southerners saw this Republican victory as a threat to their Southern way of life. So before the 1860 presidential election, many Southerners had warned that if Lincoln won, the Southern states would secede or withdraw from the Union. So supporters of secession based their arguments on the idea of states' rights. They argued that the states had voluntarily joined the Union, and consequently they claimed that the states also had the right to leave the Union. So on December 20th of 1860, South Carolina became the first state to secede. Other states in the Deep South, where slave labor and cotton production were most common, also considered secession. So during the next 6 weeks, the states of Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas all joined South Carolina in secession. Now, in early February of 1861, the states that had seceded, they met in Montgomery, Alabama, and they formed the Confederate States of America. And at the convention, they named Jefferson Davis a president of the Confederacy. A little background on Davis: the biography of Jefferson Davis contains 2 small mysteries. First of all, his birth date and his middle name. Davis himself was not sure whether he was born in 1807 or 1808. Historians have not been able to verify Davis's middle name either, which is commonly accepted as Finis. Although records and documents signed by Davis include the middle initial F, the name is not spelled out on a single document anywhere in the world. Legend says that Davis's parents named him Finis, which means the end, because he was their 10th child. So a little background on him. But along with naming Davis president, the convention drafted a constitution. And the Confederate Constitution was modeled on the U.S. Constitution, but there were a few important differences. For example, the Confederate Constitution supported state rights, and it also protected slavery in the Confederacy, including any territories they may acquire. So having formed its government, the Confederate States made plans to defend their separation from the Union. Some of them believed that war between the states could not be avoided, but everyone waited to see what the Union government would do in response. So how do they respond? Well, they thought in the North that secession of the Southern states was unconstitutional, and during the last months in office before Lincoln took over, President James Buchanan argued very hard against secession. He believed that the states did not have the right to withdraw from the Union because the federal government, not the state governments, was sovereign. So if secession were permitted, the Union would become weak like a rope of sand. He believed that the U.S. Constitution was framed to prevent such a thing from happening. Now, in addition to these issues, secession raised the issue of majority rule. Southerners complained that Northerners intended to use their majority to force the South to abolish slavery, which is probably true. But Northerners responded that Southerners simply did not want to live by the rules of democracy. They complained that Southerners were not willing to live with the election results. As Northern writer James Russell Lowell wrote, "The Southerners' quarrel is not with the Republican Party, but with the theory of democracy." Incidentally, we still see some of this stuff today. I know when President Obama was elected in 2012, there was a petition that circulated around Texas for Texas to withdraw or secede. It wasn't taken very seriously, but nevertheless, it was done. So obviously, our next step now is to try to compromise with each other. So With the states in the lower South forming the new government in Montgomery, Alabama, some people did try to seek compromise. Senator John J. Crittenden of Kentucky developed a compromise plan. It was known as the Crittenden Plan. It was presented at Congress in late of February of 1861, but it did not pass. So with the hopes of compromise fading, Americans were really waiting to see what Lincoln's inauguration would hold. What was he going to do about this crisis? So on March 4th, Lincoln took the oath of office and gave his first inaugural address, and he assured the South that he had no intention of abolishing slavery there. But he spoke pretty forcefully against secession. Then he ended his speech with an appeal to friendship, and he says, "We are not enemies but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone, all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." And that comes from Lincoln's first inaugural address. Now, Lincoln didn't want to press the South. He wanted no invasion, but he also wasn't going to abandon the government's property there. Several forts in the South, including Fort Sumter in South Carolina, were still in Union hands. These forts would soon need to be resupplied, so throughout March and into April, Northerners and Southerners waited anxiously to see what would happen next. And we will find that out in chapter 16 when we take a comprehensive look at the Civil War.